In these perilous times, see from current events how biblical prophecy is coming to pass in front of our eyes. You're watching In the Last Days, the program that looks at Israel and the end times with teaching from a Hebraic perspective. With Martin and Natalie Blackham, thank you to our friends and partners who make this program possible. Now, here's Martin and Natalie.
Hi, welcome to the In the Last Days television program with myself, Martin Blackham. Natalie, again, today's behind the scenes, and we welcome you across the world, especially our friends in the United Kingdom and indeed those who are watching by the way of internet. Great to have you with us today. As we're currently going on air, so when this comes to air, it may not be happening, but there are rockets being fired at Israel, so if the alarm may well go off, you may see us disappear. So we're very excited today to have a special guest in the studio, Netanel Amitai. Great to have you with us. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for coming across today to be with us. Netanel did a very interesting article in Aish, and I might be able to just get that on the camera. This is the aish.com. Some of you may well know about this article, have seen it. It's called Thoughts from an IDF Soldier. I'm going to be talking to Netanel about that and about Gaza and some of his experiences. And so it's going to be a very exciting program. You won't want to miss any of it, so let your friends know about it to tune in. Now, Netanel Amitai, who is our guest today, is a captain in the Israeli Defense Force Reserves. He's originally from Illinois in the United States. His family made Aliyah to Israel in 1994. You currently live in Haifa in the north of Israel, and your grandfather Eliezer Amitai was the commander of the Jerusalem Brigade who, along with other forces, was responsible for liberating the old city of Jerusalem in 1967. Your father often fought in the Yom Kippur War of 1973, and you are currently in the reserves, as I just said, and you've just been in Gaza. So this is very interesting for our viewers because, you know, for a lot of them have seen the coverage, and a lot of them are very concerned about the coverage because they are Israel advocates on behalf of Israel, and they can see the bias in the media. So I thought it'd be good just to immediately start off and just talk about the Gaza operation, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you were called up and what it felt like. And
well, first of all, I have to say that my role in this round was quite small, and that's probably a good thing. I was called up about 3 or 4 days after arriving from overseas, still getting over jet lag and trying to find out where my uniform was. And my unit was put on standby basically for the rest of the operation. Part of the time was spent down in Gaza. But I think the main point, and we talked about this before, was you know, coming back to Israel after a period of time overseas, and then getting a call up while an operation is already going by, and it's quite an interesting thing for a reserve officer who lives most of his life outside of the army, whether it be in my case in studies or other people who have families and work, and then the next day you're on uniform and going down to the outpost and getting ready for an operation. So it's quite an interesting transition.
now, it's obviously quite dangerous to be involved in something like this, and you know, there must be the adrenaline flowing that you're going to be involved in such an operation. Now, in the article, and you need to have a look at this article, it's available on aish.com, Thoughts from an IDF Soldier. In the article, you were there, I think it was about 3 days actually in Gaza itself, but you were then called back to have to be involved with the burial of one of your friends and one of fellow soldiers. So tell us a bit about what you can tell us about that.
Well, saying being involved in the burial would be taking it a bit far. I was released because a friend was killed, and because I was a reserve unit and not exactly very important for anything, I was allowed to go and pay my last respects. Dima Levitas, who fell on, I think, maybe the 9th or 10th day of fighting, had just started his position as a company commander.
Was he a reserve like yourself?
No, he was in the regular army forces, actually commanding one of the companies that I had been in the past. I had first met Dima when I was quite a bit younger, when I was a platoon commander, and we've known each other for about 7 years. with a few other officers, I was responsible for training him to be a tank commander and then making the decision that he would go and be an officer. So obviously over the years, I mean, the IDF is quite a small place, and over the years you remember some of the certain pledges that you've had and soldiers that you've trained. So yeah, I've seen Dima quite a lot the past few years, especially when I was still in the army and a bit afterwards, and he actually only had about 2 weeks on the job before, unfortunately, he was killed.
Now, do you think that the media was covering enough these kind of things, or I mean, you know, because there is a balance. I mean, obviously private, but on the other hand, do you think that the world media was covering this kind of thing at all?
I think that the world media put much more of a point of covering the other side. I think that it's much easier to breeze over a soldier who's been killed because it's in the line of duty. On the other hand, the Israeli media was very involved with the families and with the soldiers and with the stories. I think especially what we've seen this in this round of fighting is that social media has taken a very large portion of the daily, you know, daily dealing with the operation. There are pictures of the soldiers all over, and you know, small little stories, and people can, you know, they still write on their Facebook walls after they've. I mean, it's a new thing and something that Israeli society is learning to deal with. So I think inside Israeli media there was a lot going on. I don't think that the worldwide media had really too much interest in it.
And we've seen, you know, we've seen the in the media generally, and you've seen this at home, is the pictures of the civilians in Gaza. That's tended to be the what they've shown. But the interesting thing is, and the thing that you know, and I guess there's a reason. The reason for that is because it's dangerous to film. Hamas won't obviously allow you to film them firing rockets, and so the media, all it shows is these destroyed buildings and civilians, but it's not giving you a full picture at all, is it?
Well, I think the world news coverage, as usual, by the way, this is nothing new. It's something that Israel has been dealing with since probably 1982 and the first Lebanese war. But the media coverage is very one-sided and quite biased. Also because you said, like what you said, the Hamas is very strict on what gets out of the Gaza Strip. And I think that actually now we're starting to see the reporters who are leaving the Gaza Strip with a different account. And with a different emphasis on things that were happening in the Gaza Strip and just couldn't be reported. So that's starting to happen. But also I think that, you know, in the raiding war, showing Gaza is much more effective than showing what happens in Tel Aviv. The truth is that Gaza looks horrible and makes for a wonderful raiding picture. And you know, those pictures are in the end what really make more of an impact on what people think is going on, even though it's a very one-sided picture.
Yeah, and it's interesting talking about Hamas, and I was going to talk about how the conflict began. For the world media, it tends to, you know, for the BBC and Sky and all these the news channels, they're saying that it just started. You know, the recent Operation Protective Edge just started recently, but actually they've been firing rockets consistently for years, and nobody talks about this. And Hamas, since they took over, I think it was 2005 from memory, have had this build-up, this military build-up inside the Strip, and also the tunnels and everything. So maybe we can talk a bit about that, about how this conflict first. Well, I was going to say first started because it didn't really. It's like a continuing conflict, really, isn't it?
Yeah, well, anybody who really wants to start studying the conflict and the whole idea of two states in one place should really start from 1930, which is problematic. It's a lot of history. But I think that 2005 is a good place to start. That's when the Hamas were actually democratically voted in the Gaza Strip and took over from the PLO. By the way, the transition, and I don't think people talk about this too much, they were voted in democratically, but then they proceeded to slaughter and kill any of the people who had opposed them. So the PLO was being thrown off of building tops. And that's 2005. A lot of this has come down to the blockade and the Israeli blockade of Gaza. And I think an important part is that in 2005 there was no blockade. For 2 years, in fact, there was no blockade. Gaza was still a free entity, and people could still go in and out of Israel, and depending on the different systems. And there were still workers from Gaza who were working around the Gaza Strip. So that can't be, the beginning of the conflict, because Hamas had already started their terror organization and military organization a lot before that. But basically, since 2007, there has been a non-stop barrage of missiles. I wrote in my article, and a lot of people, I kind of say it with half of a smile, but a good week in Israel is a week where you have between 2 to 5 missiles. That's not a lot.
Which, if you live in the south, that's the regions that surround the Gaza Strip, is really problematic, because you're going to work and suddenly you don't know if you're going to be able to work that you're going to have to go to you're going to have to remember where the bomb shelter is. And
yeah, well, how about dropping your kids off at kindergarten and then wondering what's going to happen if there's a siren? No, 2 to 5 rockets a week, that means that there's a very large chance of it hitting your area. And that's something you have to deal with, not only with work, but also with your family life, and just having a normal kind of a life. You said in the beginning, if we disappear, it's because there's a siren. That's not a normal thing. You would never say that if you were broadcasting from London. And I believe that if that was the reality in London, things would be happening, and it would be quite different.
And it's quite stressful when you hear the air raid siren. The code, they call it in Britain, we call it the air raid siren, but here they call it the code red. If you hear it, that sound, it's quite stressful, because some people are a bit blasé, and but even so, you have to do something. You can't just hang around. You have to see where, if you can get to the shelter, if you could, if there's something you need to do.
Well, this is a whole generation of children and young people who have grown up with this for the past it's now 7 years. So you think of the effects of that on just growing up, and a lot of people talk about the children in Gaza. Let's talk about the children who live around Gaza, and obviously have nothing to do with the conflict. So yeah, it's affected a whole generation, and it's something that it doesn't get a lot of coverage because not a lot of people are being killed. But that doesn't speak to the malicious intent of whoever's firing. That only means that their technology isn't good enough, and technology advances. So one day it'll be good enough to hit, and then you'll have a whole another picture on the media. But until then.
So you had a very short time in Gaza, but enough. The IDF have to face the reality of a terrorist war. I think this is another thing, Amitai, they don't have in the media, is that it's not a conflict where there's one army and another army. This is a terrorist war of booby traps, of fighting from mosques and schools. So maybe we can talk a bit about that, because in the media, and again, when this comes to air, it may be that the conflict is in permanent ceasefire, but it's extremely important that we talk about this, because you need to know about this with the bias, and unfortunately, terrorism doesn't go away. But I wanted to talk about the mosques and the schools, because even I think in the newspaper today it talked about the UN school, the United Nations school, where there were casualties. So maybe we can talk a bit about that. Why are Hamas using the schools and the mosques, and even their military base, I believe, was in a hospital.
Yeah, so first of all, like I said before, the foreign reporters are starting to exit Gaza with a totally different story. I think it was Aishi Zidan, a Finnish reporter who just left the Gaza Strip, and released about a 45-second bit where she's standing in the Shifa hospital and saying they have just fired rockets. It's 2:30 in the morning, they've just fired rockets right out of our parking lot. So, a lot of people were blaming Israel of propaganda, but now you really have the pictures to back that up. I think that in a lot of these things, we just need to believe what the Hamas themselves are saying. It's quite simple. If we're going to believe everything else they say, why not let's get to the bottom of it and believe everything they're saying. So they're saying that their human shield operation has been very successful, and they were commending the citizens of Gaza for standing strong and staying in their houses and basically dying. Which is something that the world just cannot come to terms with. And
the IDF is trying to warn. Will go to great lengths to warn the citizens of an attack. And there's the leaflet drop. there's telephone calls, there's all sorts of way that they try to get in touch with in fact, they even shoot a warning shot so that, you know, they have a smaller missile or a smaller explosion, and then you know that building is not safe to stay in. They have all these things. And do you think that people know that Hamas actually forces its population, its civilians, to stay in those buildings? Do you think that's widely known, or?
Well, I would say that if it is widely known, then our problem is much deeper, because if it's widely known, then it's being ignored. You know, the IDF, I actually read an article yesterday saying, and it was from a European, totally disconnected organization, has nothing to do with Israel or Jewish organizations, and saying that basically the IDF was setting a new standard for the moral code of an armed conflict. You know, looking back at the past years of conflicts, you know, if you look at Sarajevo or Iraq and Afghanistan, no other army has gone to this length. In fact, our system is the only system that's a multi-layered system. That is the only point of the system is to make sure that civilians have the time they need to get out. Now, that's not saying that there aren't operational mistakes. War is war, and that happens. And civilians who are in the line of fire are always going to be at greater risk than anyone else. And we've seen that in every war all over the world. There is no war, and especially in an urban conflict, where civilians are not affected. But this system that, you know, people don't talk about or just decide to ignore is one that's never been employed anywhere all over the world, and we're the only army to do that. More than that, you know, the IDF could quite easily have conducted the whole operation from the air. There was no reason to go in with foot soldiers, except for the fact that it would save civilian lives. So we're putting our own soldiers at risk instead of doing everything from afar. I mean, our Air Force is one of the best in the world, and we have enough artillery to do the job from 30 kilometers and never step a foot in Gaza. And yet we decided to go in and you know, bring the conflict to the combatants, to the terrorists on the other side, and put ourselves in the line of fire, and we've paid a very heavy price for that.
So maybe, Netanel, can you explain to the viewers exactly what the Israeli army, the IDF, do prior to an attack against the terrorists? What's the practical steps they have to go through with warning the citizens?
Sure. So basically, there's the first step in any conflict in the Gaza Strip has always been letting the civilian population of a certain targeted area know up to 4 or 5 days beforehand that this area is going to be targeted by a military operation, and giving them 4 or 5 days to leave their homes. Now, given Gaza is not a big place, and there's, you know, it's not like you can go to a different state in the United States, but still it gives people the time to remove themselves from the conflict zone for the amount of time needed for the IDF to finish the job. So that's the first thing, and it happens through leaflets and phone calls and press releases. And I think that would probably be the first army in the world who says, we're coming. Now you have 5 days to get ready. The second step, and this is more what has to do with the pinpoint attacks and strikes against certain houses or certain command centers. There are basically 4 steps. One is leaflets that are dropped up to a day beforehand, giving the pinpoint location of when the strike is going to be. So that even gives the terrorists time to remove all of their communication equipment and make sure that their officers are nowhere to be seen. And then the second step is an SMS that is sent through an automatic system and sent to all the inhabitants of that area, telling them this house is going to be hit because of these reasons. Please leave by this time. Then there's a phone call that goes out to the specific people of that house, in Arabic, of course, warning them that their house is going to be struck, followed by a basically non-explosive device that's dropped onto the roof that makes a big boom, and that gives you another between 5 and 15 minutes to evacuate if there's still, for some reason, after all of these steps, someone left in the house. And the last stage is the human operator. And we've seen, I think there actually hasn't been enough of this, but it's starting to get out there, the videos of the IDF stopping a strike right in the middle of the operation with the pilot already on his way and telling him, don't fire, there's the smallest chance of a civilian, or we see civilian movement, and they take off the strike. Now, canceling a strike like that basically puts our soldiers at risk, because that means the ammunition, the command center, the terrorists who are hiding there are not going to be dealt with. So all of these things, I mean, that's almost 5 steps before a house is attacked. And that system is something that has never been deployed in any other place. It's setting a total new standard to moral system. And I'll say I think it's quite obvious. The IDF is much stronger when it comes to the military side than anything that it's encountering in Gaza. If we really want to be killing civilians, we're doing a very bad job at it. The statistics speak for themselves. And I think that just like after the Cast-led operation, the statistics will change. You're talking about 1,800 casualties today. Hamas is saying that 90% are civilians. After the Goldstone report in Cast-led, the Hamas totally changed their story and brought it to 50% combatants or 60% combatants. There are all different kinds of statistics that you can basically look at the problem, but the main point is that we go to very long lengths to ensure that we hurt as few civilians as possible.
Now, as we're coming to the end of the program, maybe it'd be good just to remind our viewers how they could how they can help and how they can be involved. Many of them already are. Many of you are already at home. I know that you are. You get in touch with us. I know that you are advocates for Israel. And what are the practical steps? Is there a website for the IDF, or how could they get further information?
Well, first of all, I think you kind of need to control what kind of media you are a consumer of. And if you want to know what's happening in Israel, CNN is not going to tell you the story. It's BBC and CNN. It's very hard to get a true picture. So I would say, first of all, except for the regular media that you see at home, search out and use the internet and read. All of the Israeli papers have English sites, whether it's Ynet or Mako or all the different Israeli newspapers that you can find with a basic Google search. And they'll give you a much more unbiased side, given they are Israeli newspapers, but we live in a country with a very, very free press. And also quite an active left-wing anti-war side to the whole story. So you'll be getting much more of a true story than you would anywhere else. The IDF also has a website. I think it's idfblog.il, or you can look for IDF spokesperson on Google, and that'll take you to their site. And they're quite good with being very. I can't say unbiased because it is the army, but they report truth. Which is important. They've been known to report also the army's mistakes and show the picture for what it is. And also, it's quite good to see the Israeli side of things, because what you're getting right now is the Palestinian side, and there's just nothing to say about that.
And that tends to be the media tends to cover the damage after a strike and with the civilians and their homes, and doesn't have any explanation whatsoever. One of the interesting things I've seen is that actually nobody's filming the Hamas firing the rockets, and I saw one. We've just recently had one very interesting clip from an Indian television station. Maybe we might even be able to get that in, where there was they filmed Hamas firing rockets from a civilian area by their hotel, where there are journalists of all things. The journalists go there for safety into this hotel, and Hamas are firing rockets from their hotel. So these things, we're not seeing that. We're seeing what happens after the strike, and sure, there's damage, and when you attack terrorists, there's going to be collateral damage.
First of all, I think it's important to talk what this collateral damage is, and I touched in my article a bit about what an innocent civilian is, and I think that for Europeans it should be much easier to understand. The Germans were held responsible for electing Hitler. A lot of them were normal German citizens and had absolutely nothing to do with it. That didn't stop the Allies from carpet bombing and reducing whole European cities to rubble. Now, nobody has talked about that or about the United States in Hiroshima. But the spectrum of what an innocent civilian is definitely not as black and white as what you would see on television. And the other thing is also, and I think that this is very hard for Europe to understand today, that the innocent civilian is no longer relevant, especially in the Islamic Jihad. If we could once say that it was only a fringe group or it was a small group of terrorists, today you're talking about 25 to 30% of the Islamic world being into jihad and supporting or actively supporting a jihad. That's 300 million people. So this is not a fringe group that we can ignore or say it's a small problem. And basically what that has done has rendered these innocent civilian populations to be totally irrelevant to sustaining the Western way of life. And I've also just looking into history and understanding how little the civilians could really do. There were innocent civilians. They didn't stop Hitler from killing 18 million people and causing a war that killed 80. And the innocent civilians in Russia didn't stop Stalin from killing 20 million people. So the innocent civilians in Gaza haven't stopped the Hamas from firing rockets and kidnapping youths and basically having a whole plan to kidnap and kill Israeli civilians. And they need to be dealt with. After that, we can all go back to having peace. But the key to having peace at the moment is dealing with the Hamas and understanding that terrorist organization is the one who's causing its own people to be killed and doing it very blatantly in front of the camera.
And so it's been great to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining us today
Thank you for
coming into the studio. Thank you for joining us as well. You can email us at info@inthelastdays.com. Visit the website www.inthelastdays.com. And remember, we're living in the last days.
You've been watching In the Last Days, a TV program with Martin and Natalie Blackham, the program that looks at Israel and the end times with teaching from a Hebraic perspective. If you would like to financially support the program or find out about conferences, meetings, or ministry products, then please contact us with the details on your screen. Visit our easy-to-use website at www.inthelastdays.com and register for our free e-newsletter. Get the latest news from Israel, product information, online video teaching, or watch today's TV program at a time that's convenient to you. Thank you again, friends and partners, for making this program possible.
See you same time, same station for the next program from In the Last Days.